Okay, good afternoon, and I'll wish you a Merry Christmas. This is December 23rd, so we're a little early. December 23rd, Houston LaRouche PAC meeting. But I think we have a lot to be thankful for. There are a lot of miracles. You might think miracles have been unfolding, but of course we all know that this is about 99% hard work and 1% inspiration. But that's how miracles happen. And I want to just point out that we have now done the second run of the pamphlet, Robert Mueller, an immoral legal assassin. He'll do his job if you let him. The first 10,000, you could say, had begun to, like a can opener, begin to open the lid. And we now have put another 10,000 into print. We've just gotten our second shipment here. And I encourage everybody that's in the Houston area, please get copies. Let's really deploy this, because you think what's happened since we first put this up on our website in September, late September, and then started to get it out in print shortly thereafter. We have caused the kind of avalanche, not just against Robert Mueller, but what we intend to do, and this would be the miracle of all miracles, is to bring down the British Empire with it. And I might remind you, it was in Christmas night of 1776 that George Washington crossed the Delaware in one of the first and most important victories of the American Revolution. So I would say we can take great pride but gear up, because we have yet another major battle to win, and our goal is, we will be getting now the new pamphlet out, but let me first put up the Raphael. I want to show you something I just found. I thought it was really beautiful. This is a Raphael. Take just a few seconds to get this up. It's called the Madonna with Book, and sort of my idea of what a beautiful image of the birth of Christ and what this means to the world. As Helga's often talked about, we have to come to the point where we end the rule of oligarchy and we end a culture of oligarchical thinking, and we enter the age of reason. And I think this is really a beautiful portrayal of this. I really have never seen anything before similar, because you see the Madonna, you see the baby Jesus, and you see the book. And you do see, as you always look for these things in the background, obviously the land has been cultivated. You see people in the background here on the left, you see people in the lake, you see a building to the right. And I think, we ought to think about our mission here. We just, we got to finish off Mueller and, defeat the British Empire and bring in LaRouche's 4 economic laws. But we really have to raise mankind up to the power of reason, as was LaRouche's autobiography in 1988. And I just want to take just a quote from his foreword of that book. Sorry, 1987, actually, he wrote this. He points out that he'd been a controversial, influential figure for 20 years. This is 1987, so I think add another 30 years and we're talking 50 years. Then says, Mr. LaRouche says, and he says, unlike all of the other leading candidates for the U.S. presidency since 1945, I am an influential original thinker. This is, and he goes after Vice President Bush and Senator Dole, who were running at that time. He said, for the past 40 years, the successful candidates for the presidency have been persons who, in the customary manner of speaking, advanced their political career up to that point by doing the right thing at the right time, saying and doing nothing which will make enemies among important factions of the establishment. And exactly how he points to Bush and Dole, how they adapted to, business as usual. However, this is a crisis, and in such a crisis, what is customarily successful becomes a failure. We've entered a period in which only original thinkers are qualified to lead. And I think that is how we have to think about what Peter Bowen will be presenting this afternoon on an original thinker, a genius, Alexander Hamilton, who in a time of crisis was able to rise above the common opinion and doing the right thing or the customary things that didn't work at the period of the end of the American Revolution, as Pete will go through. So, I mean, with that image in our mind, and the idea of the power of reason, and we are entering an age where, no doubt, we are seeing examples that there is more and more capability of grasping this reason. I'll just go through a few updates, because with this pamphlet on Robert Mueller, we have created some miracles. And we'll have, I'll go through that in a moment. But we also have a lot of work to do. Let me put the lights on for a minute. Because this week, as an example, President Trump gave an address with the National Security Direct Doctrine, Security Strategic Doctrine, National Strategic Security Doctrine this week. Normally this would be given probably, I guess, by the head of the National Security Agency, which is McMaster. Trump himself delivered this. And he changed the language somewhat of the document as it was written, and clearly written by people like General McMaster, who was a geopolitician. And I want to remind you who was the choice for the NSA chief before McMaster. Remember? Michael Flynn. And Michael Flynn would never have tolerated this kind of geopolitics. There's no question about it. That's why they went after Michael Flynn. And I might remind you that Michael Flynn was, in all the scandals that have unfolded, keep in mind, he wanted to bring nuclear energy into the Middle East as a means of starting to solve the crisis in the Middle East without oil simply being a raw material, but that start to bring in the technologies to develop a modernized economy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's been a political leader that's suggested, outside of us, outside of Glenn and LaRouche, since General Eisenhower has suggested such an idea. That's why they wanted to get rid of Michael Flynn. And if you think about what President Trump said in this speech, and he didn't actually read it, he modified it somewhat. He identified the Russians and the Chinese as rivals. Apparently in the document, the language is much more, much worse. Basically identifying, that there's conflict between the United States, Russia, and China. Now, this is after Trump has made a tremendous breakthrough in relationships, both with President Xi Jinping of China and President Putin of Russia. So, here he is, in a sense, he's going along with something he doesn't necessarily believe. We don't really know what he believes. I think from what we've seen of his actions, he clearly liked to work with Russia. He clearly liked to work with China. But, he's also, as long as this Mueller coup is running, the president is under enormous pressure to buckle. And this is an example where clearly, he should not have gone along with the language that would even identify Russia and China as anything but allies. Now, if you want to see where this could head, let's put up the next. This is the cover of Newsweek. Newsweek this week. It says, Putin is preparing for World War III. Yeah, that's bad news. But why would you say fake news? It's fake news. This is the latest, this is the Christmas edition of Newsweek. And anybody who knows what the Russians are actually doing, whatever military maneuvers they're conducting, whatever, quote, military exercises, military buildup, the Russians are reacting to the aggression that NATO has shown. And I don't have the figures in front of me, but if you compare even a year ago, 2 years ago, the number of NATO exercises, and this even includes around Ukraine, to this latest year of NATO exercises up to the border of Russia, which we had promised at the time that the Cold War supposedly ended, that such exercises would not go to the border of Russia, yet we're threatening Russia directly. They have doubled in numbers in the last year alone. What would you do if you're the Russians? And I mean, it's not just Newsweek. NPR ran, and of course that's funded by the government, US government, but you begin to get a sense that there's two factions in our government. And this geopolitical faction ranting about Putin with the Russian dissident Kasparov, ranting about Putin as a dictator with no support from his population. Now, all the polls I've heard about in Russia show Putin is wildly popular and likely to be reelected. You know, he's running for president again of Russia. And then they were the NPR praising Obama's director of national intelligence, James Clapper, for saying that this Putin knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with President Trump. So he put together this kind of propaganda, and Bild Zeitung ran a similar headline. Again, lied even about the size of the NATO exercise called the PAD. The Russian exercise, the PAD, 2017, claiming that the Russians had 100,000 troops, probably more like 10 to 20,000 troops. So I just point this out because we can't take for granted, you know, with the breakthroughs that we've made so far, that this is going to be a smooth path, a smooth sail onto getting this Mueller coup brought down. We have to bring it down, because if you leave the enemy to play like this with the minds of our population, it's very deadly.
They're in pretty bad shape with traffic. After the Amazon marijuana.
Yeah.
This is totally
oh, very. Okay, good. Probably can't afford to pay a staff anymore. I can't imagine people pay for a subscription or go to the news. I wasn't even going to go buy it. I just wanted to put the picture up. As for updates, I just want to go through a few things, and then I'm going to turn the meeting over to Pete. We had a very interesting situation just evolve over the last few days. The McCabe, who, number 2 of the FBI at one point, temporary head of the FBI, when Comey was fired, on Tuesday, was interviewed in closed-door hearings at the House Intelligence Committee, accompanied by the General Counsel of the FBI, James A. Baker. As far as we know, there's no relationship to James Baker the third, but definitely in the same mentality. And apparently it was asked of McCabe at the hearing, this kind of question, a hypothetical of would it be ethical if James Baker this attorney had communicated with the author of Mother Jones' article, David Thorne, who first publicized the existence of the Steele dossier. And that's exactly apparently what had happened. That imagine the general counsel of the FBI in leaking to the media the secrets like this so-called dossier, this Steele dossier, which began to be then used as the driver for the Russiagate against President Trump. And interestingly, we just found out that James Baker has been, quote, reassigned, i.e. the guy's been kicked out of his position and who knows where he's ending up. But we just got an article just a few minutes ago that McCabe is now, quote, retiring. He's going to be retiring from the FBI, and maybe sooner than later. Maybe sooner than he even plans on. He's trying to stay in long enough to get his retirement, which I think is outrageous. But I point this out because you can see that the wagons are circling, not just around Robert Mueller, but they're beginning to circle around President Obama himself, his whole intelligence team, just think about it, using a British authored dossier with no verification, was never vetted properly, to go after a candidate and then the president, Trump. And an article just appeared yesterday in it's a news and politics journal called Tablet. And it's apparently very respected. A lot of young professionals read this, a large Jewish audience. Headline: Did President Obama read the Steele dossier in the White House last August? And it starts to date. The investigation into the Fusion GPS manufactured collusion scandal has focused largely on the firm itself, its allies, the news media, as well as contacts in the Department of Justice and FBI. But it says, however, if a sitting president used the instruments of state, including the intelligence community, to disseminate and legitimize a piece of paid opposition research in order to first obtain warrants to spy on the other party, and then to delegitimize the results of an election once the other party's candidate won, we are looking at a scandal that dwarfs Watergate. It goes on to say, and I think this is really true, the involvement of sitting intelligence officials, we know some of the names, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, and so on, McCabe, and a sitting president, Obama, in such a campaign should be a frightening thought, even to people who despise Trump and oppose every single one of his policies, especially in an age where the possibilities for such abuses have been multiplied by the power of secret courts. Now, you can go through the article yourself. The details I'm not going to, really go through at all here, but I do think it's rather interesting towards the end. It points out that around June 23rd, according to the Washington Post, whatever source that you want to take it for, an envelope with extraordinary handling restrictions arrived at the White House. It was sent by courier from the CIA. It carried eyes-only instructions that its contents be shown to just 4 people, President Barack Obama and 3 senior aides. And the implication of this article is that was the Steele dossier being hand-delivered to President Obama. So the plot thickens, and come back for the next installment in 24 or less hours, because this thing is just rolling. But I want to just finally close so that I can properly prepare the stage for Pete. Podium. I want to also point out another very horrendous development this week, which is the tax reform. We're really talking about, this is monetarism at its worst. The idea that by corporate tax breaks and there will be other implications of this, of course, but basically it's going to create a $1.5 trillion deficit in the budget. And this, from everybody's knowledge of how the CEOs of corporations work, and even the corporation executives themselves, at a meeting with Gary Cohn, where they did a poll of these corporate executives about what would they do with such a tax break. Would they be opening more jobs? Would they be investing in infrastructure? Would they be improving wages? None of the above. They're going to buy their own stock. They're going to go buy each other's stock. This is just to add more fuel to the stock market. And this bubble isn't going to last much longer. And as Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase put it, this is a QE4, quantitative easing 4, just more of a bailout. Versus, what if, let's say $1.5 trillion, let's take that figure. What if that had been directed, or what if we can succeed by the time, let's say, of President Trump's State of the Union address. It's one of our horizons now, January 30th. What if, you can put up the 4 laws, what if by that point we were able to get an understanding of Hamiltonian credit and national banking such that it would be understood that we could have and could still take that idea as a tax credit investment program, perhaps, as Kennedy did, in encouraging corporations to invest into the infrastructure in all areas. And right now, by the way, FEMA's not only run out of money, but the budget, the supplemental budget of $81 billion, I believe, has been put off into January. So for those people that are waiting for their FEMA funds or waiting for, something to help relieve their crisis, which is still, for many people, the lives they're living every day after Harvey, just here, not to mention Irma in Florida, and God knows what's going on in Puerto Rico. I know if 80% of Puerto Rico does not have full electricity, and I think the other 20% are on generators. And so what if we were to take the approach that Alexander Hamilton took and said, look, the government can direct credit to a national bank and even take debt as the form of the basis of that credit to move into the real economy and start really building our infrastructure so that the kind of disaster that happened in Washington State this week with the Amtrak train that went over the rail and onto the interstate, and there were many reasons to have known in advance that was likely to happen. And there are many other such disasters awaiting us. Or the Atlanta airport down for 12 hours without electricity. That's the kind of thing that happens in a third world country, not in a modern nation state, as China has shown us the example. And this will be the pamphlet. We'll be getting this, I hope, next week here in Houston. It's already going out on the East Coast, and we are already organizing with this. We picked it up at the printer. LaRouche's 4 Laws, America's Future on the New Silk Road. So there's the future, and I will now open the meeting to Pete, who will then help us understand better how the Hamiltonian approach to credit is the way to go.
Okay, well, the idea here is to simply discuss how a new national bank will work. That's the third part of LaRouche's 4 economic laws. The 4 economic laws are to separate the investment banking from commercial banking, as Glass-Steagall did back in 1953, and then to set up a national bank, and from that national bank issue federal credit for infrastructure development, and to combine that with a fusion-based infrastructure platform. So those are the economic laws that we need to get passed in Congress, and by December 30th, by January 30th, the President's State of the Union address, we want him to be espousing those 4 laws. And just like laser beam defense, he can name it anything he wants, right? And we called it the Beam Weapons Program back in 1983. President Reagan called it the Strategic Defense Initiative. Great. But the idea is he has to be promoting these 4 economic principles. And I want to discuss the principles behind the idea of a national bank. And what Marcia said a little bit ago, when she mentioned his presentation, that Hamilton was a genius. And there were probably only a few people that could actually explain his principles to others. And the job we have today is to explain these principles to a lot of people who certainly don't have any concept at all of what a credit system is versus a monetary system. And so that's what I want to look at here. This proposal was originally drafted by work between Paul Gallagher and Michael Hirsch in 2013, and now in 2016, Paul sort of rewrote it and made it a little bit more refined. But the key thing is this idea of a credit system versus a monetary system. That's the key thing. And Hamilton, if you read people of the establishment who like Alexander Hamilton, they'll tell you that Hamilton based his principle, his financial policies on the Bank of England. The Bank of England was the model. And what did the Bank of England do? Well, it was an independent institution in England that was basically in control of the currency and control of financial matters of the nation, independent of the government. It would do what it wanted to do. And of course, our Federal Reserve is established on that kind of thing, independent of the government. But Hamilton wanted a bank that was independent of the government. He didn't want, like a funding program for, say, canals to depend every 2 years on financing from the government, because popular opinion might go against it. But once you've started it, you can't stop it if you're serious about getting it done. So you need an independent institution through which these projects can occur, through which and of course the Congress can always make changes, right, to legislation, because the bank itself is to be legislation, so it can, and it was nullified several times, and really has yet to be reestablished since the work of Franklin Roosevelt. So, so let's talk for a minute about this idea of a credit system and a monetary system. Now, how many in here have ever had to borrow money? Now, when you borrowed the money, right, you were told certain things, like when you have to pay it back, and how much the interests are going to be, right? And it is specified, I believe, in the contract that there are penalties for being late. And of course, being late, sometimes if you're late, you have to borrow money to pay the fees and the late payment. And so then you've got a bigger debt than you had to begin with. And of course, if any of you are familiar, and almost all of you are familiar with the IMF's operation, that's exactly the way they treated these third world countries. They would go in, make a loan based on revenue expected from resources. The revenue source was lowered. The price of their oil, the price of their raw materials was forced down by the market. And so they couldn't make their payments on time. So they had to refinance and refinance and refinance until, these nations were basically at the point where, well, like where Greece is now, like their hospital system has been destroyed because they can't afford to import the medicine needed for the population there. So that's the way the monetary system works. You sign a contract, you got to pay up. And and Hamilton believed that. I mean, if you look at this, look at Section 1, E. Says Alexander Hamilton was correct in finding that a public debt is a public blessing when directed to a public bank into advancements in the productive power of the nation's economy, and, quote, when the means for the ultimate extinguishment of the public debt are provided. So he is very clear that the debt that's contracted has to be paid back. Right? That's the idea. And it has to be a means to pay it back. And now, of course, what did they do with the original national bank, right? They said that the debt was going to be paid through a whiskey tax and through tariffs. That the whiskey tax and probably some other excise taxes were dedicated to pay the interest on the bank shares. That was the debt of the bank shares. So people took their revolutionary debt, they went to the Treasury and they purchased shares in the bank with their, bonds that they had loaned money to the government, for the prosecution of the Revolutionary War. They put that money down, that debt down, and said, okay, I will exchange these for shares in the bank, like preferred stock, which meant a guaranteed rate of return, something in the neighborhood, I think, of 6% was the rate that was offered. And so they needed an income stream that would guarantee that those preferred stock would earn the interest promised. No matter what the bank did, they were going to get the money. And that's what he firmly believed. Alexander Hamilton firmly believed that that's the way you have to manage these things. Otherwise, who's going to want to invest in your bank? Who's going to trust the notes? And of course, once you establish the trust in the repayment, then the value of those notes becomes money. Meaning, you have this note, and it's going to earn this much money. You know it's going to get it. So someone can accept that as payment for what you owe them. Now, how does the government do that? Well, the government says, for every dollar of debt you give us, if you invest in the bank, securities you're giving to us, which, by the way, today, the way it would work is, if you take your Treasury securities and buy debt in the national bank, you would be paid a higher rate of interest than you're getting on your securities, but the bank would be paid the interest from the government that those securities demand. So on the one hand, the bank would be paying you a greater rate of interest than you get from your securities, but part of what the bank's paying you is going to be paid by the government. So once that is established, the government says, okay, we want to circulate this means of payment. So they print money. They print money up to the value of the security. And they can loan that out. And as it says on section 3, paragraph 8A, it says we want to capitalize the bank up to $1 trillion. And we're going to get that money by accepting Treasury securities which have at least 3 years or greater of maturity. Now, you can invest for 6 months in the U.S. Treasury. You can invest for a year, 2 years or whatever. But, we don't want those. We want something that has a little bit longer maturity. Then, so we're going to take that stuff. And then outstanding municipal bonds of federal, states, or cities, which have a 5-year or greater maturity, would also be accepted. And the shares you get in return for this are going to be callable during a period of 20 years only by the bank. Now, I'm not, people are more familiar about the financial terminology. I got some of my questions answered from Paul, but callable, I believe, means that you cannot, the bank, you cannot sell back to the bank the securities that you purchased. You can't. All you can demand from the bank is the interest. You can sell the security to somebody else, but you can't sell it back to the bank. It can't be returned to the bank to be paid up for principal until 20 years. And that's just to protect the capital of the bank. So the capital of the bank doesn't be a run on the capital of the bank. Okay. So you'll notice then in paragraph C in that same section, section 3, it says, and you can go to that one, yeah, right? Yeah. That's section H. Well, maybe it's not there. By issuing additional identifying equal to, yeah, okay, that's not there. That is not there. Okay, but you can read it in the copy there. Section 3, paragraph C, as authorized by the Thomas Amendment of the Agricultural Extension Act signed into law in May 12, 1933, following the subscription of the bank's capital, the bank shall be provided with an issue of U.S. Treasury notes, greenbacks, equal to the capital subscribed to the bank in the form of outstanding Treasury securities under Section 3A. So again, what this bank is going to do is it's going to circulate in the form of currency the debt that is in its vault. You know, the debt that is owed to it by the U.S. government is going to be circulated as currency. So now that is you know, apparently it's sort of a standard procedure. We have a question?
He has made 100 muskets and he got a receipt. He didn't actually get paid. You're saying you could take that receipt to the bank will issue currency and the equivalent of that receipt and distribute that to the population. You could exchange the receipt.
No, we're talking right now about security. So if someone has let's say the Continental Congress wrote out a bond of some form of debt to that manufacturer, and the manufacturer then takes that instrument of debt and presents it to purchase preferred stock in the bank, then that would work. But simply a receipt for unpaid goods, I don't think it works. It has to be some form of contracted debt.
If the person had been paid, then why would we use debt to capitalize the bank first? Kind of what
Well, the muskets were probably purchased by money that was borrowed by the government to get the muskets. That's where the money would have come from. And if they didn't get paid, it was because the comptrollers were dereliction in their duty, or they just didn't, the money that they borrowed didn't show up. Right. Right. I mean, you have to realize that the big controversy that Hamilton had to resolve was not that kind of thing, but it's rather, let's say I purchase a bond from the revolutionary government. I gave him $1,000 expecting that I'd be paid, et cetera. And I'm holding this bond. The Revolutionary War has been won. I haven't been paid any interest. I haven't been paid anything. And I need to rebuild my barn. It's got blown up in the Revolutionary War. So I need money. And I have this security which is not earning me any money. And in fact, there's a lot of people like that. And so some guy from New York comes along and says, well, I'll give you $500 Hey, well, that's $500 I don't have. I need it. Okay, I'll take it. You know, this guy's got the bond. And what Hamilton was faced with, and what the nation was faced with, was how do you deal with that? Because it was very popular to say, well, the guy that originally had the bond should at least get his $1,000. If the guy that that bought it is going to get 1,000 plus interest, the guy that originally had it should at least get his 500 back. Blah blah blah. Say, well, if he sold it for 500, then he gets it. And I can't remember the terminology that he used for that, but that was the big problem. That was the problem. And Hamilton said, look, we're dealing with a market instrument, and we're talking about the public credit. We're not talking about honor among revolutionaries or whatever, right? We're talking about public credit. And if we want to strengthen our public credit, then we have to guarantee that what we say is what we're going to do. So, if someone sold his rights, his entitlement to $1,000 plus interest to somebody else for $500, he sold it. It's not his anymore. It now belongs to this other guy, the speculator, right? And we have to honor that. If you want to do something for the guy that made the investment and lost out on selling it, think of all the different conditions under which that might have happened. Someone might have done it for reasons that were not based on, pecuniary losses, but that he had some other thing he wanted to do, so he just decided to get rid of it. Sell it. Wasn't particularly stressed. And at what point do you say someone deserves to be redressed for the thing? I mean, the gradations of that kind of thing would be so innumerable that you couldn't possibly come up with a rule by which you could decide who gets, redress and who doesn't. Well, they had, okay, you're sort of mixing up a couple of things. The first thing he does is takes it and purchases preferred stock in the bond, in the bank, preferred stock. That's what he does. Now, if you own U.S. Treasuries, you'll be able to go to the National Bank and purchase preferred stock. Well, it is publicly traded, but preferred stock means that your dividend does not depend on the financial conditions or the profitability of the current cycle of production. Like common stock means you're going to get, this year you get 2%, next year you get 10%, the year after that it's 5%, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, a negative return. But and that it's losses in the value of the stock. But preferred stock is paid a fixed rate of interest for the duration of it, until it's matured. Right. So if you give $1,000 at 6%, you're going to get $60 every year. Yeah, it's guaranteed. And you also, if the company goes bankrupt, then you also, you are preferred to other creditors. So anyway, but that's the idea of preferred stock. So you buy that preferred stock, and you're going to get your 6% every year. And what's going to guarantee that? The highway tax, or some other tax that the government assigns to fund the debt. Right? Well, okay, so now we've got this in the bank, and I'm going to be paying you 60%. But what the bank's purpose is not this transactional money management. We want to finance the development of our country. So we're going to take the $1,000 that you've given that you purchased in the bank. And on the basis of that debt, which it's a U.S. Treasury debt, right? The Treasury is going to pay on that debt. We're going to contract with it. It's going to get that debt. So what with that instrument, we're going to say, okay, we've got $1,000 sitting here. We need to circulate that $1,000. How are we going to do it? Well, we're going to print $1,000 and loan it out. Yeah, that's greenback.
These are loaned out at a lower interest rate than the taxes from the bond that was purchased.
What the interest rate would be? I think 4% is what it says in here. But that's, again, that's a legislative and a decision by the directors of the bank.
Not less than 4%.
Per annum, yeah, but not less than, to be decided by the board of directors. But that's on the securities that you purchased preferred stock. You're going to get not less than 4% per annum. Right? Now, what they charge to the customer of the bank is probably more sort of a judgmental kind of thing. They're not interested in making lots of money, so they want to keep interest rates low. They want the bank to make a profit, right? So if it's got to pay out 4%, then it's probably got to charge 6%, right? In order to finance, to run the show. You got to have some money that's above and beyond the costs of running the bank, because people who are running the bank are going to have to be paid, and the bank's going to have an office, and computers, all kinds of stuff, right? So you got to be able to get some money to do that, and so that's what will determine the interest rate the bank is going. Anybody else have a question on that? Did you get a copy? You got it? Okay, good. So that's the kind of questions that are important to ask, because we've got to, if we're going to get people to think about how the United States government is going to somehow build a new platform, something in the neighborhood of $8 to $12 trillion infrastructure platform in the United States over the next 25 years. If we're going to think about that or plan to do it, we better understand what the principles are involved. So now this, you'll notice in this a couple of times. Yes.
How would you capitalize the bank today? I mean, because the majority of the population doesn't have the kind of asset to capitalize the bank on the level needed of, say, $50 trillion worth of infrastructure development, let alone, just to bring it back up to, everyday standards.
You start with $1 trillion.
Well, no, but to capitalize it at $1 trillion. The idea, right, is that Japan, China, each have $1 trillion in U.S. securities. If they were to come and purchase the preferred stock, then we'd be there. Oh no! This what is restricted is that the directors of the bank is like Japan buying stock that have no voting rights in the bank. Right? This is a U.S. sovereign institution. Yeah, Ron.
What is the notion of the credit system and money system becomes clear? Hamilton saw those idle workers, farmers, productive applicants. That was the real wealth. But how do you plunge that to insurance and kind of activity? He was also seeing a situation where individual states, foreign powers all had a demand various ways. That actually provided that life and credit for him. So look at the two systems. What he did is stabilize the system, use in that credit office with the system for a lot of things to work. But he's driven not by money exchanges, but on the potential that could be unleashed. So he's directly, like you were saying, into these bigger projects, causing a situation for the first time that retired this debt at record rates, which is like, so I think the question here is not so much how did all the money transactions get worked out. We keep in mind this credit system that puts the physical economy to work, and then you see the byproduct that is
right. But that has to be codified, and that's a very important part. That is probably the most significant difference that this bank and Hamilton's bank had with the Bank of England or any other, commercial bank. It's exactly what Ron is addressing. And I don't know how well anyone out in TV land, internet land, in YouTube, heard what Ian was asking about, or what Ron was proposing. What Ian was asking about is the particulars of financing that you would, I presume, gather from my answers. What Ron was saying is that the issue here is not the monetary predicate of how the bank works as a money moving instrument, but rather the intention of the bank, which is to take the productive potential that exists in the population, and activate it, bring it into motion, and that's what the money's for, to bring that into motion. How do you do that? And the way an ordinary person, an ordinary banker thinks about that is, well, okay, here's a guy's got a good idea about, setting up a computer shop in such and such a place. So I can probably safely loan him some money, and he'll make a profit, and then he'll start paying me back at such a date, such a rate of interest, etc. Right? And then Harvey comes through. Yeah. Well, now, from the standpoint of a monetary system, Harvey doesn't take any difference. You got to pay the money back. You got to pay. You get flooded out of your apartment, but you're still, quote unquote, living there with a lease. You got to pay the rent. That's a monetary system. A credit system says, what's the purpose of the credit? The credit is to cause an increase in the productive activity and the productive power of the economy. That's what the credit is. So you have Harvey come through. Okay, you can have a moratorium on your payments for the next, 6 months. Because obviously it's going to take a while to get things back in order so you can get back to business. And if you look at, and I think this is the most important part of the bill here, look at Section 5. Paragraph A, it says the majority of banks and discounts, majority of loans and discounts made by the bank should coincide in maturities with the time period of anticipated profitability and projected useful life of the project. This is Section 5 on the 3rd page, and it's paragraph A. Maturities which coincide with the time period of anticipated profitability and projected useful life. Now, if you're opening up a computer shop and you want to, you're going to have a business, it probably takes 6 months to a year to establish a profitable income stream. An income stream if you could justify collecting the, monthly debt and interest, right? And, you know, that'd be something for the banker and you to decide, which is fine. But if you get hit with Harvey, you need some kind of protection. You know, but because we don't want your business to go away because Harvey arrived. We want your business to succeed. So you get a moratorium. But think if you need an extra $1,000, you need an extra $10,000 to get things going, well, we can add that to your loan. You know, that kind of thinking. Now, think about establishing a fusion-based economy. Well, if the bank starts loaning money to Princeton for fusion research, they're not going to get repaid next year. Right? There's not going to be any money coming from Princeton next year unless one of their things becomes a immediately viable, productive technology. You know, which in some cases, like when MIT was working on the NASA project, some of the things they came up with did relatively quickly become viable investment pathways. But there's an example where here we were putting a lot of money into NASA, and MIT, it was very unusual that MIT got the job because it was an educational institution. It wasn't a business. And at a certain point, that got so a fuss was made about that. But and they ran into problems then, real serious problems in trying to get things put together. And there's a wonderful video that Mike suggested looking at that goes over, how they proceeded. But there's an example that because of this investment over a 7 or 8 year period, what was produced was the entire computer industry that you got today in your pocket because of what they did with that money. And that has created more tax revenue than by, orders of magnitude than what was spent on creating it. And so that's how an economy is expanded. And it's that base, what that did was change the infrastructure of our country and the world. It created a new infrastructure platform, a new platform for development. Because now we have computers everywhere, everybody. I mean, one of the ways they're trying to alleviate poverty in some of these communities in China is to get them internet access so they can sell their products over the internet. And that kind of approach to what economics is really about is how do you make these things happen? And whatever you spend on it, if it's properly designed, it's going to increase the productive powers from economic activity. It's going to generate real surpluses in their economy. The productive power of people will grow. Which brings up something I saw the other day that I'm a little bit concerned about. They're taking great pride in establishing Apple futures in China. That this was a great financial innovation and it's going to stabilize the value or the price of apples for apple-producing communities in China. Fruit. Not the edible apples. Edible apples. And they say that they say it's a double-edged sword, because of the way these things work. But the management of risk is what they're talking about, so that apples can have a stable price, so that the counties in China, which overlap, the impoverished counties, many of them overlap with areas of intensive apple production. So they want to be able to stabilize the prices of apples so they can actually have the level of an income stream that is going to allow them to work with the poor population based on that income stream and help them. I don't know if that's going to work or not. I mean, so there you go. There's an example of trying something, of putting something into motion. And they've got a lot of people buying the future. It's pretty wild. Yeah.
In that 55A,
Yeah.
you know, that the bank should coincide in the series of timetables and anticipated profitability and projected useful life. I was thinking of a farmer. For example.
Yeah.
Right? Because you know what the growing season is. So doesn't it benefit the bank to lend to the farmer, knowing that in how many months, 9 months, whatever it is, the farmer will have crop produced and be able to pay profit because he's been allowed to invest in the fertilizer and the equipment and stuff that's needed to farm in the first place. Whereas the monetary system doesn't look at it.
Right. And what, of course, the thing that the farmer has been faced with and has created this issue of parity is the instability in pricing. So you contract debt at a certain, on the basis of a certain price, in your corn, your wheat, or your soybeans, or whatever it is, and then price drops, and so you don't have the money to pay back your debt, so now you have to refinance the debt and finance the crop for the next year. So these are the kinds of things that the monetary system doesn't, crises that the monetary system doesn't alleviate. You have to have a credit system so that the, just like we were calling for a moratorium, you know, on this, the housing bubble, and the housing bubble first. We wanted a moratorium on all of the mortgages which were going underwater. Okay, don't pay for a while. Let's get things stabilized and find out what the real value of your property is, and we'll go from there. But of course, we didn't do that because we're protecting the monetary system. So it's the mature, and as I was pointing out, it's just like, what's the maturity of the investment in the future? Right? I mean, that, you know, it certainly isn't 12 months. Right? It probably isn't even 20 years. You know, but the idea is that that's what you have to have in mind. Now, if you read the next paragraph, the bank may make loans to companies involved in manufacturing related to the purpose of Section 2. For such companies, additional needs of capital expansion, where those companies can show that the additional capital cannot be obtained from local or regional and private commercial banks. So there you have again the idea that if you didn't get enough money, that doesn't mean you have to pay back what you borrowed first to get an additional amount. If you were undercapitalized to start, then we can allow you to get more capital. And this is being written into the bank's charter. I mean, that's what's important. So bankers, as we all know from the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, you know, bankers can make decisions not to force you, you know, into bankruptcy or blah, blah, blah. They can do that. Of course, then they're in a subservient to the financial system on top, which makes it pretty difficult. It's like when savings and loan institutions are giving out loans at 6% to build a house, and they borrowed the money to give you that loan at 10%. That was a problem. And, you know, that created a real problem in our system. It shut down all the things. Or they had to sell them out or whatever. They got rid of them. So then in paragraph C, the bank may extend the time for payment of a loan through renewal of the loan, substitution of new obligations, like rewriting it, or otherwise with the maximum time for such renewal to be established by the bank board of directors. The bank may make such further loans for completion of projects or additions, improvements, or extensions, which will increase the assurance that the borrower will repay the entire loan or loan. That's a lot of wiggle room that's written in there, right? And that's so. This is what I think the difference between a monetary system and a credit system is. A credit system is based on intention. And it's not always immediately quantifiable. But there are mechanisms through which we can establish the kind of institutions we need so that we can say, we can take this $1 trillion, we're going to be paying our 6% interest on it, or whatever, or 4%. Yeah, 4%. Paying our 4% interest on that $1 trillion, and we're going to be investing this all over the country in projects, to get going. And this 4% is not going to be based on the repayment of those loans. It's going to be based on the highway tax. It's going to be based on some other income stream assigned to the bank by the government. So some of the loans we make will probably pay off in 5-10 years and start increasing the productive activity of the region into which the investment is made, so that there's a greater tax revenue base, and that will be coming into the government, and that will pay for the 4% that the bank has to, or that'll pay for the securities that the bank has in its vault, U.S. government securities, the treasuries that it has taken in form of payment for the preferred stock. So I think it's it's instructive to think about these things, and sort of try to get to the nitty-gritty of it, and that's where you sometimes run into getting into the details of the monetary implications, who's going to pay what and how, which all has to be worked out. You have to work all those details out because you can't run a bank if you don't have them worked out. The concept under which it's organized is what is the crucial thing, because all banks make loans and expect repayment. And so what's the intention of the loan is the thing that has to be understood. And Hamilton had his own battle with this stuff. He got together with some financiers after the Revolutionary, after the Constitution. If you read in the public credit, in the report on the public credit, it says that we now with this Constitution, which he organized, that he put together, basically, he and Benjamin Franklin put together the Constitution, and now that we've got our Constitution, now we can talk about public credit, because now we have an instance of centralized authority that can carry out the job that needs to be done. And he wanted to show that this can work. So he and his buddies got together and raised about $500,000. Now, in 1791, that's a lot of money, right? $500,000. And they got a tax break in perpetuity from the state of New Jersey. And they were given control over the Passaic Falls. It's called the Passaic River. And I think I have a picture of it there somewhere. I'll tell you which one it is. Number 10. Oh, there it is, right there. And the idea was, it's kind of funny that in July of 1778, Washington and Hamilton and others took a break to look at the falls, had a picnic over there. And it must have occurred at that point to Hamilton that, boy, there's a lot of power in that water, So in 1791, when they set up the Society for Nuclear Manufacturing, they put together the sum of $500,000. And in 1911, they were allowed by law to raise $100,000 by lottery, selling lottery tickets. And there are a couple of the they're doing that. Literally a lottery. I don't know what they got paid. The reduction is 15%. Anyway, it's the idea was you purchase it And, you know, if your number got drawn, they get the money. And they raised money. I don't know if they were authorized to raise $100,000. I don't know for it. But now what happened was what they wanted to do was get involved in textile manufacturing and acquired some sophisticated equipment. So and skilled labor. And they looked around in the United States, and we didn't have it. We didn't have the means of producing the material, the machinery that was needed, and we didn't have the skilled labor. So they sent a guy to Europe with $50,000 in his pocket to skilled labor and buy machinery, and got on a ship, and that was the last anybody ever saw of him. Just absconded with the $50,000. And this guy, William Durer, who was a friend of Hamilton, you know, and had, you know, they had engaged in certain kinds of stuff. He was a speculator. He was a financial speculator, and he got in trouble. He actually wound up in jail, so, you know, debtor's prison. So that really upset the whole society for manufacturing. For a while, but Hamilton pulled it back together in 94, 95, something like that, and started actually building what was necessary. They had to be able to divert water from the fall into raceways that would be able to drive water mills and things like that, water wheels and stuff like that. And they got some stuff going, but it was undercapitalized, and so they never really got it working the way it should have. And so by, I think, 96, they had to close up shop. And then Hamilton was assassinated, you know, in 1804, I guess. And in 1806, 1807, another guy comes in as, you know, because the Society for Youthful Manufacturers was there. And because of the power of the Passaic River, what they started using it for was offering companies to come in and purchase rights to the water power. And this worked, you know, in various ways, all the way up to 1900. You know, so for a century, it was an operating, a going concern. And of course, in the 80s, what was developing then was electricity. And which is an interesting thing to think about, because that's with a whole new platform, right? That was a whole new platform for the economy. Because what did the water wheels, or even steam engines, what did they do? They turned wheels, and then the wheels had to be connected by pulleys and belts to the machinery. So you couldn't have a machine in one corner of your factory and then decide the next week it was more efficient over here, because the pulley system had it over there, and you'd have to rework the whole pulley system. You can't change. With an electric motor, you can change. And so that kind of thing sort of demonstrates what it means to go from one. If you think of Lynn's term, potential relative population density, is that what Hamilton had discovered, and it's really important for people to understand that he discovered this as an economic idea and put it into practice, this idea of a credit system. That it's the purpose of the nation to develop its population. And the mechanism, the means by which that can be done, is a credit system. And he basically discovered that idea, because he saw the workings of this stuff in St. Croix, where he was the clerk for a local store manager, and apparently he was really good at it. But he also saw the effects of slavery all the time, and he saw the rich versus the poor. And when he got to the United States, he was one of the most avid supporters of manumission. Slaves should be free. And he organized within those societies all the way to his life. He's actively engaged in that kind of stuff. But it's the seeing that you to increase the productive power of a population, you have to give them the best tools. You have to give them the most efficient mechanism. So they knew they had to go to Europe to get the material that they needed to build an efficient thing. The problem is we didn't have a skilled workforce here in the United States. So they ran into roadblocks, so they couldn't unleash the potential that was there. Once you start creating the pathway of activity, then the potential can be unleashed. And the Chinese have learned that lesson. If they want the Asian economies to grow, if they want the world economy to grow, there have to be efficient mechanisms to trade among the regions. You need railroads, and you need efficient railroads. You need ports, you need efficient ports. You have to create the most efficient mechanisms by which the creative potential of the population can be unleashed. And that's what, Hamilton discovers as a principle. And it's rediscovered by John Quincy Adams, it's rediscovered by Abraham Lincoln, it's rediscovered by FDR. And it's not only rediscovered by Lynn, but it's recreated in a very important way. Because what Lynn is saying is we can measure the potential of a population given a certain economic platform, certain infrastructure platform, technology platform from which that society is operating. And we can measure that from the standpoint of what we've had in the past and what we expect in the future. And the kind of economics that means it's not a money game. It's a, how many workers do we have? What are the tools in their hands? How much can they produce today? If we give them this new tool, how much are they going to be able to produce? How's it going to work? And that's what the bank is supposed to engender. It's supposed to create that condition where those possibilities can be activated. And of course, it's going to return to the bank eventually. It's not the loans they make when paid off are going to bring the bank a profit. So that profit can go right back into the economy in that same way, with a different level of, expectation, a higher level of time. And the government's still going to be paying 4%. The owners of the preferred stock in the bank are going to be getting their dividends right along, all the way. And as the profitability of the bank expands, there's no obligation to increase the rate of payment on your preferred stock. All that money that's going to be coming in can now be turned into loans again. So the whole system can move forward. And that's, the thinking that, that has been done, that Lynn has been done. And it's, the bank proposal that's in your hand is something that Paul Gallagher is primarily responsible for. It's, putting it into words. So that's it. I mean, there's a couple of little things that you might want to think about. Think about how a standard gauge railroad is going to change the potential of Africa. Right? Or think about how a fusion power platform could change the United States. I mean, fusion power, it means having virtually free electricity. Any amount of electricity you want, you can have for almost nothing, provided you make the investment in the delivery. You have to have a good thing. A fusion torch. You don't. All you need is landfill junk for your resource. We got lots of landfill, right? And then, of course, the fusion, of course, is absolutely critical for colonizing the solar system. And then after that, who knows? Who knows what we're going to discover about the laws of the galaxy? Any other questions?
I was thinking that Mr. LaRouche Lynn is always focused on the notion of political economy. And now this will have to identify, well, that's a political economy, finding out many players. It's actually quite political itself in terms of how it's actually. If you have a political economy where you're looking down the road, 50 years, 100 years, in terms of where you have to outlay in credit to make this living organism. And so you have a responsibility for the whole thing. It's not a simple science. It's driven by this activity. What do we have to do? Fusion economy, you talk about it.
Which actually makes there was a question asked in the last economics class, review of the economics class that Ben and Megan and Jason did, right? And one of the questions was, well, how do you deal with the fact that there's so much unemployment caused by the advance of technology? And Ben's answer was really very simple. He said, look, how could you possibly answer that in the midst of economic collapse of a system that just doesn't work? You introduce new technologies and it causes unemployment. Well, of course, because the system isn't based on new technology. It's not based on development. You know, it's based on a fixed order of things. And like what you just said, surprises me. I mean, 24 billion people who run a fee-based economy. I mean, just think about the level of employment, the intellectual level of employment of those 24 billion people. They are not going to be working with a shovel in their hand. You know? Yeah.
I talked to Anita. You know, I'm with the Harris Springs Resource Institute.
Oh, Anita.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh. Wife.
Yeah.
Anyway, she talked often about this. Now, the thing is that this is credited to get a creation of capital. Now, the main thing that I like about this is that this is transparent. Above board, you can see it. You know, there's some defining aspects to the limits. I think that the unlimited and unregulated, the criminal aspect, credit version is when they bailed out all the big banks, you know, the big corporations, the big companies. That's what they did. They just created the money out of nowhere. They created $1 trillion obligations, debts, grants to the big corporations out of nowhere. But that's the credit thing. But they're misusing this thing that could actually save. Whereas this one is something that's focused more on helping people with small businesses.
But I think take it to a little bit higher level in the way you're thinking about it, because what you've identified is the intention of a monetary system. right? The intention of a monetary system is not free trade, it's not supply and demand, it's we with the big money are going to stay that way. That's the intention of a monetary system, right? And the intention of a credit system is the development of a nation, the development of the productive powers of the people. And so it just goes to show that it begs the lie that economics is a quote-unquote science by itself, right? It's not. It's not. Economics is a political economy. It's a decision process, and it's the most sophisticated science that we know, because it is a science of political economy, and it has to do with loving mankind, which is at the center of it, and recognizing that mankind, through its creative genius, which only mankind has as far as we know, it's through that loving of mankind that we make the transformations necessary. We make the discoveries because we love mankind. We turn it into, productive power because we love mankind. And that's the purpose. That's the intention of our system. And it's interesting to reflect on this stuff, especially because this is Christmas. We have at home a little cutout or detail from Leonardo's Adoration of the Magi. And it's a very interesting painting because it shows Mary with Jesus on her knees, and then surrounded by people who are sort of crawling up a hill, looking very strangely at this Christ figure, right? And what are they looking at? What is it that is Christ's message? Well, Christ didn't talk about political economy. He didn't talk about constitutions, about bills of rights and things like that, right? He talked about love. The terms in which creativity is understood was love. And that, because the emotion that we associate with love at its highest level is the emotion of creative discovery. And impelling that. And it's that quality which Christianity as a social force has nurtured in our civilization. And I think it's a very important point because, especially given what China is doing. Because one of the things that Xi Jinping is doing is emphasizing innovation, emphasizing creativity. And he's making that a big point because that is noticeably lacking in Chinese culture. They don't have a tradition that recognizes the individual for the potential of creative discovery that we have developed in Western civilization, in large measure because of Christianity. So it's something to reflect on. I thought about it. I didn't have a whole lot to say about it, but I think it's a really interesting question to explore. Because as China develops, the influence they're going to have on the world is going to be very, very great. And it's good from the standpoint of their current intention. But this idea of the creative genius, the potential creative genius of the individual has to be developed in their culture. And that's what a thing that I think that we can contribute. Which isn't to say it doesn't. It does. It does very much. I mean, they came up with gunpowder. They came up with movable type. They came up with paper. They did a lot of stuff, right? So they know how to make inventions. But each of those inventions, what happened? So they became toys. Yeah. Okay.
earlier concept. But it's widely emphasized, and you have a natural theology very much corresponds to including parts of the body, including priesthood, and well, otherwise it's another subject. Because that should just be clear. If it hadn't come for the open and all that on that, those inventions which China created and which they gave to the West would have flourished there as well. So it's become this idea that it was naturally ordered. The British school, in terms of interpretation of Chinese history, argued that that in fact, what maybe former statements argue that in fact Confucianism itself was ordered the process of scientific progress in China, which is the British letting themselves off the hook. Their monetary policy and imposition of imperial regimes, like monetary policy, is what afforded temporarily the progress of Chinese civilization. But that opens up another window. But it goes back to this. It does fail the same concept that you're bringing up, and it's why China today can progress so rapidly, utilizing concepts that are near of the politics of Hamilton and certainly otherwise derived from history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know more about it than I do. I mean, I'm just sort of speculating. And the thing that what you said makes me think of is the way that China's idea of the mandate of heaven is that they've always recognized culturally the government as a father figure. That its role is to ensure that the family is taken care of, and which is very different from the popular view of American government, right? It's not your friend, it's your enemy. But the Chinese leaders take very seriously the role they have in taking care of the population. And that is especially the true Deng Xiaoping. No, who was it? Deng Xiaoping? Oh, okay. Yeah, Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, with the opening up, and now with even more so with Xi Jinping. So Alexander Hamilton's work and Lin's work have moved history in ways that are going to be appreciated as long as we don't wind up nuclear level by mankind forever.
It reminded that why we always have to keep this eye on the British Empire, because you mentioned that Hamilton and Washington were moved to finance this with the tax on whiskey. If you look at history, there was a whiskey revolt orchestrated, and Washington lost a lot of friends. He was in a real fight because in a battle for independence. Now you want to impose these kinds of criteria and taxes. But it was, again, a British insurrection, outrageous, directed.
And Hamilton led the troops. So, anyway, I think it's a lot of very interesting thinking can be going on. And, I hope I helped stimulate some of it. Yeah.
I think it's really, what was Alexander Hamilton's title?
He was the Treasury Secretary. He was the chief I don't know what you call him, but he was like the chief aide to Washington throughout, pardon? Aide de camp of Washington. He was extremely close to like glove in hand. I mean, yeah, very, very. And Washington almost always deferred to Hamilton's opinion when it came to government matters. You know, there were a few times I think that it was noted there was, Washington didn't take what Hamilton said. Hamilton was a genius. I mean, the people around him must have known that. They probably didn't understand what he was saying all the time, but they must have known that this guy was an unusual character. Well, he was born in St. Croix to a Scottish father and a mother who lived there. It wasn't saying it was Nevis, I think, it was the island he was actually from. And then, as a result of dislocation of his mother, because his father had, they wound up in a situation where they were in need and left the island of Nevis. St. Croix, an island, or is that the city? Yeah, okay, so he wound up there. And at a very young age, I think like 12, he was taking over the books of the rum and cotton, wasn't it? Oh, sugar, that's right. Yeah.
This one recognized him at that very teenager age, and they raised some money together and they sent him off, I think, in that state.
Yeah, he went to King's College. Well, to King's Columbia. Yeah. What I had read was that there was actually one of the, like a minister or an educator on St. Croix was the organizer. Oh, okay. So yeah, okay. So that would have been from the United States and a business connection of people in St. Croix. Yeah. Anyways, it's very, very thoughts.
All right, thank you.